We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato, and this is from the introduction titled Thinking Big Again. Across the globe, countries, including in the developing world, look to emulate the success of the U.S. economy. In doing so, they look at the power of, quote, market-driven, end quote, mechanisms versus what might seem like old-style state-driven mechanisms in places like Europe or the ex-Soviet Union. But the United States is not what it seems. The preacher of the small state, free market doctrine has for decades been directing large public investment programs in technology and innovation that underlie its past and current economic success. From the internet to biotech and even shale gas, the U.S. state has been the key driver of innovation-led growth, willing to invest in the most uncertain phase in the innovation cycle and let business hop on for the easier ride down the way. If the rest of the world wants to emulate the U.S. model, they should do as the United States actually did, not as it says it did. More state, not less. A key part of this lesson should be to learn how to organize, direct, and evaluate state investments so that they can be strategic, flexible, and mission-oriented. Only in this way will top minds find it an honor to work for the state. This is something that needs to be understood not only by the rest of the world, but in the United States itself, where the dominant political narrative is endangering funding for future innovation and economic growth. In 2013, U.S. government spending for basic research fell below what it was a decade earlier, and most likely will continue to fall due to congressional gridlock over the public budget. Rather than static discussions about the size of the deficit, there must be more debate about its actual composition, how to invest strategically in key areas such as research and development, R&D, education, and human capital formation that will increase gross domestic product, the GDP, in the future, bringing the debt-GDP ratio down as a consequence. And how to engage in a debate about the direction of change so that such investments will lead to growth that is not only smarter, that is innovation-led, but also more inclusive and sustainable. These issues are urgent with the upcoming 2016 U.S. presidential election, which could, if properly informed, change the parameters of the current static debate. The United States desperately needs politicians with the courage to swim against the tide of popular rhetoric and outline a bolder vision for the state's dynamic role in fostering the economic growth of the future. In emerging economies such as China, the public sector is indeed investing billions in green technologies with the expectation that these industries will be the engines of future growth. The United States could take inspiration from its own history. In 1961, an American president set out a bold, ambitious, and risky mission to send a man to the moon. Who will have the courage to set out a new vision for America today? Addressing today's societal challenges, for example, those around climate change, requires a vision, a mission, and most of all, confidence about the state's role in the economy. As eloquently argued by Keynes in The End of Laissez-Faire, 1926, the important thing for government is not to do things which individuals are doing already and to do them a little better or a little worse, but to do those things which at present are not done at all. End of quote. This, however, requires the public sector to have vision and confidence, increasingly missing today. Why? What is the role of the public sector in economic growth? After the financial crisis, with public budgets bloated, mainly due to their role in saving the private sector, across the globe we are hearing that in order for nations to be competitive, innovative and dynamic, we must have more market and less state. As at best, we are told, governments merely facilitate the economic dynamism of the private sector. At worst, their lumbering, heavy-handed, and bureaucratic institutions actively inhibit it. The fast-moving, risk-loving, and pioneering private sector, by contrast, is what really drives the type of innovation that creates economic growth. According to this view, the secret behind an engine of innovation like Silicon Valley lies in its entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. The state can intervene in the economy, but only to fix market failures or to level the playing field. It can regulate the private sector in order to account for the external costs companies may impose on the public, like pollution, and it can invest in public goods, such as basic scientific research or the development of drugs with little market potential. To some on the political right, even fixing market failures would be a sin, because such attempts would lead to worse outcomes in the form of government failures. What all these views have in common is the assumption that the state should stick to fixing markets, not directly try to create and shape them. A 2012 Economist article on the future of manufacturing encapsulates this common misperception. This book is committed to dismantling this false image, which underpins a global trend promoted by conservative economists, politicians, and the media of bashing and diminishing the importance of the state. It focuses on what Tony Judt called a discursive battle. How we talk about the state matters. Depicting private business as the innovative force while the state is cast as the inertial one, necessary for the basics but too large and heavy to be the dynamic engine, is a description that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we continue to depict the state, continues. So the book is The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So how about a day of actual progressive truths and pushing back on some of the con lies out there? I want to get into, in this first hour, a couple of questions. One has to do with how the Republicans are destroying democracy, and the other, a big question, I guess, is do you think that the fervent Trump supporters are merely badly misinformed people who've spent too much time watching Fox or listening to right-wing hate radio, or are they actually deplorables? Are they actually people that you would not want to hang out with ever under any circumstance? You know, basically bullies, people with an authoritarian streak, people with personality disorders. We'll get into that in just a minute. I wanted to bring you up to date on just a couple of news things first. The former Deutsche Bank executive who oversaw Donald Trump's loans, this is from the lawandcrime.com website, has died by suicide. His name was Thomas Bowers. He was the executive who signed off on the controversial loans to Donald Trump back in the day and more recently. Federal investigators have been asking about documents that he may have over at Deutsche. He would have been the gatekeeper for all the financial documents of all the bank's really, really rich people. And he was the head of the Deutsche Bank's U.S. Private Wealth Management Division. And, you know, this is the guy that Donald Trump and Jared Kushner were getting money from, and he just hanged himself. Meanwhile, we had this election in the UK, or actually the Brits had this election in the UK, and Jeremy Corbyn, who some have described as Britain's Bernie Sanders, I don't agree with that description, but he is to the left, far to the left, lost. And so people are saying, oh, well, you know, you really need to, Americans really need to be going with the center, because, you know, if the Bernie guy lost, then it would be the Joe Biden guy who would win, right? Well, it turns out that the Joe Biden party is called the Liberal Democrats, not the Labor Party. And, you know, the Labor Party is sort of like a progressive party, and the Democrat and the party that would be closest to the U.S. Democratic establishment would be called the Lib Dems or the Liberal Dems. They got wiped out. You know, its leader, Joe Swinson, lost her own seat. Last spring, this is from Kate Aronoff over at The Guardian. Last spring, Nancy Pelosi met with members of Change UK, a collection of Labour MPs who quit the party over opposition to its leftward shift. Two of the three MPs, members of Parliament with whom Pelosi met, lost their seats last night. Let's not forget, Democrats lost over 1,000 seats under Obama and handed a rash of state legislatures to Republican trifectas. And, so wake up. Here's Labour policies. 6 in 10 people in the UK support Labour's policy of free broadband for all. 64% support renationalisation of the country's railways, and a full 56% back a total decarbonization of the UK economy by 2030. 63% supported a Green New Deal. And those numbers are similar to numbers in the United States. So, and finally, the Judiciary Committee's report is out, and the Judiciary Committee's report not only says Trump should be impeached, but says he actually committed crimes. His behavior was both constitutional and criminal in character. The report covers multiple federal crimes, including criminal bribery and wire fraud. So, serious stuff. So, the question, are the Trump supporters merely badly informed, poorly informed people, who watch too much Fox or listen to too much right-wing radio, or are they actually sadistic? There's a piece over at Raw's Story, published by John Storr. It's the headline, Conservative Evangelicals. Now, it's that particular slice of the Trump voters. We'll get to other slices in just a moment. Aren't hypocrites, he says. It's worse than that. He says the reason they support a fascist president is simple. They're sadists. And he says, I'm not talking about like sadism in the sexual context. I'm talking about sadism in the context of people who get pleasure out of inflicting pain on other people who they think deserve the pain. Now, the they think deserve the pain is pretty important. And he says these are sadists. He says, for example, punishment for being gay is divine justice in the minds of these conservative evangelicals. From such so-called justice comes pleasure, which is sadism. Richard Rorty wrote a book about this. It's called Achieving Our Country. And he pointed out that Southern apartheid, racism, misogyny, and back in the day, slavery were all socially acceptable forms of sadism. As Adam Serwer wrote for The Atlantic when he was writing about Trump putting children in cages and Republicans supporting Donald Trump in doing this, he said, cruelty is the point. That, that these guys, it's, the goal of this article and of Rorty's book was to make socially acceptable sadism less socially acceptable. So he's arguing that, hey, they're sadists. How can people kind of overlook the fact that Donald Trump created a fake charity, which he got busted for in New York State? He used that fake charity to bribe Pam Bondi, who was then the Attorney General for the state of Florida, to stop her lawsuit against his fake university. After he gave her a whole pile of money from his fake charity, she dropped the charges. And meanwhile, we've got this, this impeachment thing going. Star Wars actor Daisy Ridley recently said that people who continue to blindly support Trump are not fully sane. She said, everyone has an issue with Trump, every sane person anyway. Daisy Ridley, big star of Star Wars. She's British, I believe. Painting with such a broad brush is kind of tough. There's an interesting op-ed about this by Frank Vian Walton over at Daily Kos. But he points out that he says, I have to admit that all the Republicans believe are lies and BS, that they're rife with the disease of delusion, and that the Republicans have lost their damn minds. Donald Trump, for example, derisively speaks about people who disagree with him. He's a serial liar. He's a bore. He's an admitted sexual assaulter. He says very fine people agree with Nazis or are Nazis. He has separated over 5,000 children from their parents. 7 of them have died. Our internment camps are now leading to deaths. How long before we start, building cremation chambers in them? Trump was in communication with WikiLeaks and Guccifer through Roger Stone during the election, coordinating the release of these hacked emails. He falsely claims that Ukraine has possession of the DNC server. He and Giuliani are doing this sham investigation of Joe Biden. This is all serious stuff. So, I told this story a while ago. In our neighborhood, or down the road from us, a friend had a dinner party, and somebody mentioned that somebody had committed suicide with a gun and said guns should be regulated. And another person freaked out and stormed out and said, the liberals want to take away your guns. I mean, as a Trump supporter, it's like they got triggered. These people are like snowflakes. But is that because they're badly misinformed? I mean, this person is, I know him. I think he's a decent person. But whoa, right? Or are some or all or a majority of the Trump supporters, merely people who are like in the ride for the sadism? Are they going along with this because they think, yeah, sure, hey, let's make those people hurt? Is that the point? I mean, they're certainly making people hurt. We're seeing an explosion of anti-Semitism. We're seeing more murders of Jewish people than I recall in my lifetime. We're seeing, brown people being put in cages in the southern border. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Why?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I mean, I guess that's really the big question. Why? I mean, Jen Seiko's father, remember The Brainwashing of My Dad, that movie? He turned into like this curmudgeon, but he was a decent person underneath. And welcome back. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom.
Hey.
God, I've had this recurring thought. I mean, with exactly what you're talking about, only you're going off in another deal. I've come to the point that that this a metaphor for the propaganda that the right wing is so devouring and swallowing so easily. It's Soylent Green. And they will become
for people who don't know what you're talking about, Soylent Green comes from a novel back in the 60s. You'll have to remind me of the title of it. Pardon? Soylent Green was the title of the novel. Thank you. Yep. And at the end of the book, you discover that the food that everybody was eating, which is called Soylent Green, was actually people. It was people ground up and made into food. So anyhow, back to you, Randy.
Well, there's the point is that they are consuming information and ideology that is consuming them and consuming our democracy. And it's just so doggone sad. There's another point I'd like to make about Alan Dershowitz. Did you see Dershowitz on C-SPAN this morning by any chance?
No. I mean, other than Fareed Zakaria's show on CNN yesterday morning, I have not watched TV all weekend, and I just watched a little bit of one of the news shows this morning. I think it was the Poppy Harlow show. I watched about 15, 20 minutes of it. So I'm
Dershowitz.
Yeah, go ahehed.
Dershowitz was saying that he's not Trump's lawyer and he's not paid to. He's just a good American with a good reputation and a good mentality of doing good is why he would represent Trump and why he's standing up for Trump. But then he turned around to say that. And pander black voters in saying that black voters should get out and vote, while when he's supporting Trump, he's for denying black voters and the poor to vote. And when it comes to, you know what I'm saying, voter suppression.
Was it Dershowitz who said that when he was getting massages by the girls that Jeffrey Epstein had solicited or had brought into his house, that he always kept his underwear on? Wasn't that Dershowitz?
Oh, my God. I didn't know that.
Well, I'm not sure if it was Dershowitz or if it was some other famous lawyer. It might have been somebody else.
Dershowitz. Now, Jeffrey Epstein did come up today in that conversation. He did about an hour on C-SPAN. But he really doesn't have credibility, Tom.
Yeah.
He's speaking for all this freedom and for I think basically what it boiled down to is he didn't use these words, but it's an illegal search and seizure. That this is a violation of the president's rights, and he's so wrong because he doesn't recognize all the wrongs that come with the right wing and their ability to shape our political future with deeds from the past, like the Powell Doctrine and Winniski and all these other cats. So I don't want to take up too much time, sir. I just thought I'd touch base and wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to you too, Randy, and appreciate the call, and I think you're spot on your observations. It's always nice to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's 19 and a half minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Exposing the con in conservative, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Stick around. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, the question I'm asking, and I will get to your calls in about 10 minutes here, but the question I'm asking is, are Trump supporters deluded, misinformed, good and decent people, or are they, by and large, the authoritarians among us? John Dean wrote this book called Conservatives Without Conscience, and it was based on the work of a previous psychologist who had written a book called The Authoritarians. And John Dean pointed out that about 20% of the population are authoritarians. Most are petty authoritarians. They rule their households like tyrants, or their workplaces, or things like that. But a few are, and many of them are authoritarian followers. The authoritarian, the ones who, in their workplaces, they're like the middle manager who constantly is yelling at people and shutting them down and making them feel terrible and humiliating them in front of, big meetings and things like that. Some people just get joy out of that. And, but the authoritarian leaders, that's actually a very small percentage. It's maybe 1% of people who can become authoritarian leaders, essentially. And they seek typically positions of power, whether they become police officers or politicians or whatever it may be. Politicians is where Trump would fall into that category, although he was a petty, I'm sure with his family, a petty authoritarian. But so anyway, who are they? What are they in your experience? The other thing I wanted to talk about, very briefly, and also toss out for your commentary if you'd like. In Wisconsin, about 3 million people voted in the 2016 election, just short of 3 million. And Trump won by about 23,000 votes. In the election for the governor's race, which just happened in 2018, Tony Evers, the Democrat, defeated an incumbent Republican governor by only 30,000 votes. So that's how close Wisconsin is. So back in October, the Wisconsin Election Commission sent a letter to 234,000 people In Madison and Milwaukee, Madison, well-educated college town, state capital, I believe it is. Milwaukee has the largest African-American and Hispanic population in the state of Wisconsin. They got twice as many of these letters as the rest of the state, maybe even 4 times as many. I'll give you the numbers in a few minutes. The letter says, and I'm reading from the letter, the actual letter, if you still reside at this address, please use one of the following 3 options below to confirm, basically, that you still live here and you're a registered voter. Click the gray My Voter Info button at myvote.wi.gov and enter your first, last name, and date of birth. Click the search button and click the green confirm button. Or vote in the next election, or sign and return the postcard at the bottom of this letter by mail or in person to your clerk. So most people getting this letter said, okay, I don't want to go online. That's a hassle. I got the letter because I'm registered to vote. I haven't moved, and I intend to vote in the next election. So if I vote in the next election, they'll continue to have me on the roll. And in fact, that was the plan, that people who didn't return the card and didn't vote in the 2020 election would be removed in 2021 after the election. But then this right-wing legal foundation, or this right-wing group of lawyers, it's called WILL, was created in 2011 with the help of a $500,000 grant from the Lynn and Harry Bradley Foundation. The Bradley Foundation is they have $600 million in assets, and they, quote, provide a cornerstone for the conservative movement in Wisconsin and across America. And they sued, saying, no, anybody who didn't send back a card, their name has to be immediately taken off the voting rolls. Immediately. Just in time for the next election. And last Friday, right after I got off the air, Wisconsin Judge Paul V. Malloy ruled in favor of WILL, of this right-wing group, and these 3 Republican voters who said anybody who doesn't send the card back, particularly those black people in Milwaukee and those liberals in Madison, need to be purged from the Wisconsin voting rolls. He issued a writ of mandamus ordering the Election Commission to purge more than 200,000 people. They sent out 234,000 letters, and only a couple thousand cards came back because it said, if you vote, you're good. In fact, while Madison and Milwaukee account for 14% of the registered voters in Wisconsin, they received 23% of the letters, almost twice as many of the letters, which means that the people in rural areas got half as many of the letters, which actually isn't a 2-to-1 ratio. I think it's a 4-to-1 ratio if I'm doing my math right. So you've got that. And then over in Pennsylvania, I mean, they just had this vote. This was a week and a half ago. Vote totals in a Northampton County judge's race showed one candidate, Abe Casas, a Democrat, had just 164 votes out of 55,000 ballots across more than 100 precincts. Turns out that the ES&S voting machines failed to count the votes of 26,142 Democrats who voted for this Democrat. And when they did a recount using just the paper ballots, the Democrat won. Whereas in the initial reporting, the Democrat only got 164 votes. Lost badly. I have a bad feeling about this coming election.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And the solution to it is for us to all wake up and start becoming election activists really aggressively. Years of strategy and struggle against the prison industrial complex. It's a collection of essays. This one is by David Gilbert on page 31, titled The System Within the System, the Prison Industrial Complex and Imperialism. For those of us held behind locked gates within the walls and fences topped with razor wire, the corrections regime is the system that works tirelessly to impose total control over every aspect of our lives. Yet as ponderous and powerful as prisons are, they're only one part, a central girder, of a much bigger and more foreboding house of horrors, which can most accurately be named imperialism. The structural needs of the larger edifice set the specifications for the size and position of the girder. The strength of the girder helps determine how long the building itself will stand. We can't understand the explosion of imprisonment in the United States since 1971 without looking at an imperialism's urgent needs and goals of that period. By the same token, we can't develop an effective program around the prison industrial complex without grappling with the stresses and trends of the larger system of imperial rule. To be clear, before you take time to read this chapter, I don't offer any brilliant ideas on strategy. Those will most likely emerge from the organizing and activist efforts themselves. However, some of the concerns discussed may raise questions that go into forming strategy. I definitely look forward to learning from the dialogues that this generates on these issues. Imperialism may sound like the kind of rhetoric we want to avoid, but it's one word that needs to be rescued as the best way to name the system that rules over us. The basis of imperialism is the relentless quest for profits around the globe. Its most striking characteristic is the colossal and grotesque polarization of wealth. That polarization happens between nations, between the rich countries of the North and the impoverished ones of the global South, the impoverished countries of Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, and at the same time within each country based on class, race, and gender. The poles of dazzling wealth and abject poverty are intimately linked, as the former results from the ruthless plunder of the latter. This system is built on and intensifies all the major forms of oppression: patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, all of which are structurally central. At the same time, imperialism highlights the global character of the system in a way that explains why the most intense oppression and resistance have been in the South, and that also provides the context for why the liberation struggles of the various people of color have been in the forefront within the U.S. There's no way to capture what the system costs in human life and potential, the pain and loss for all of us. Close to 1 billion human beings suffer chronic hunger, while another 2 billion face nutritional deficiencies. 1 billion lack access to clean drinking water. Just looking at children under the age of 5, imperialism is a holocaust in progress. Over 9 million die every year from easily preventable causes associated with poverty. The price for future generations may be even more severe as the rapaciousness of this global frenzy for profits threatens the very ecological basis for sustaining human life on any scale on our planet. Since most people won't accept living in squalor amid plenty, imperialism entails both the most sophisticated and the most brutal forms of social control. Its most salient feature is war after war after war, mainly against the peoples of the South. The domestic front line of such repression is a truly violent and harmful prison industrial complex. Today, 2,300,000 people are held behind bars, about 7 times the number in 1971. That explosion was unprecedented, coming after a 70-year period when the rates of imprisonment had remained more or less constant. This dramatic change did not result from some sudden skyrocketing of criminal activity, but rather from a radical expansion of what was designated as a crime and a draconian increase in the punishments for those crimes. Such extreme measures were driven by considerations way beyond criminal justice and often at cross purposes to the proclaimed goal of public safety. These destructive changes were born from crisis, one much more severe and protracted than the periodic ups and downs of the business cycles that occur over a roughly 10-year period, but rather a situation that threatened the very survival of the system. Such structural crises occur because capitalism is by its nature unstable. The economy is vast and complicated, but the major decisions are made by a tiny corporate and financial elite, with each thinking only of his own profits. When a structural crisis develops, the long-term institutional arrangements that assured a reliable flow of profits and the rule of capital no longer function. One dramatic example was the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II. At the end of that period, a new set of international institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were created. At the same time, a new deal was hammered out for the terms of the bargain between capital and labor within the U.S. Those arrangements worked well for capital until they broke down a generation later. That new structural crisis, which emerged between 1968 and 73, is the seedbed for the burgeoning of the prison industrial complex and many related changes in U.S. history. The first and most obvious signs were political, as the resistance to imperialism crested in 1968. Abolition now. by Mariana Mazzucato. On the science revolution this week is the real science of Santa Claus. Would you believe it if I told you that Santa was on a psychedelic high? Plus, Ron Jackson is here about the Carbon Project you should know about. Behold the Trump crime family's disrespect of life and humanity in geeky science. And don't miss the good, the bad, and the very, very ugly, plus the fact of the week, letting us know about the end of fish. Welcome back. So, the question, who really deep down inside are these Trump supporters? Or should we trust in the essential goodness of all humanity? Or are there some sociopaths and sadists among us? And are they at the core of the hardcore Trump support, much as happened with the early fascist movements in Franco's Spain and Mussolini's Italy? And, of course, Hitler's Germany. Last night, Louise and I watched that documentary over on Amazon Prime. It's called European Fascism. Steve, somebody or other, puts the thing on. It's fascinating. Oh, and also, I wanted to mention, on Saturday, Louise and I went to see the movie Harriet, about Harriet Tubman, the woman whose picture was supposed to be on the $20 bill this year, and Donald Trump canceled that, remember? Harriet, this movie is absolutely mind-boggling. You've got to go see this movie. I mean, I thought I knew the history of Harriet Tubman. Boy, do I it is so moving. This is such a powerful movie. It's called Harriet, and it's in theaters right now. And take your family, take your kids. I mean, it's got some tough parts, but it's not. There's nothing obscene about it, or I'm not sure what its rating is, but I would feel comfortable having anybody go to it. So anyhow, Mike in Hope Sound, Florida. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's up?
Tom, thanks so much, and I like the question. I consider myself an expert on the Trump supporter because I have friends and family. And when you talk about what kind of people these are they basically, are they mean-spirited? Yes. Are they sadistic? Yes. You can make a list, but I could say, sadism, fascism, Christian terrorism, homophobes. You could probably pin every one of them to one or more of these. And even the ones who don't match this, my bottom line is these people will vote for those traits. Now, that they may or may not think they're good people. They definitely think they're good people, but let me tell you something. They are not.
Are you talking about friends and family here, Mike?
That's right. And I have a brother who I don't speak to anymore. And let me give you an example. The reason I don't speak to him anymore is not because of 2 or 3 years of Trumpism, which he is, but it's because of 20 or 30 years of conspiracy theory mindedness. In other words, the Trumpism didn't surprise me. But after 20 or 30 years dealing with lies and dealing with this kind of mean-spirited nonsense and actually self-loathing, because he's hurting himself by supporting this nonsense. If you don't shun these people, if you don't confront them, if you don't walk away from them, what we're going to end up in this country, and I honestly fear this, that we're going to have to make a decision. And I'm talking about truth seekers. We're going to have to actually talk about dividing this country up. And I don't say that in a depressed way or trying to solve this, but we've let them run all over this country. We've let Mitch McConnell steal SCOTUS picks. Once you let them in like that, you better start talking about dividing the country up.
No, well, you can't physically divide the country up, Mike. If 10% of the population are deep down inside sadists, and now they have a political expression for it. It used to be they just acted out their sadism in the workplace by snarling at their fellow workers.
Well, let me say this.
Or being brutal to their spouses. Excuse me.
Well, let me say this. You cannot divide the country up. I don't say that realistically. But what you can't let happen is to let them seep into the culture and to gain power until there is no country left, and until the Constitution is null.
Well, that's the story of Viktor Orban's Hungary. That's the story of Duterte's Philippines.
Right.
That's the story of Bolsonaro's Brazil, although he's starting to get some pushback. That's certainly, you know, the story of Orban's Hungary, if I didn't start there. You know, And of course, that's the story of the rise of fascism in the 30s in Europe.
But let me remind every listener out there, too, what we have today is not something to compare to McCarthy. I will say this. If McCarthy had been shamed and humiliated, which he was.
Ultimately, that's what took him down.
That's right. And let's pretend that then he went on to run for president with Roy Cohn or Richard Nixon as his vice president, and he won. That's what happened in 2016. We had a man who was humiliated and continued to push birther and nonsense, and was elected by the people. If 1952 America knew that McCarthy was a joke, and 2016 America doesn't realize that Trump is dangerous and a joke, we're in a lot of trouble, like you said about these election scams.
Yeah. Well, I'm agreeing with you, Mike, that we're in a lot of trouble. It's the question is what to do about it. I mean, you know, traditionally, there simply wasn't a space in either major party for bigots and hateful people, by and large. I mean, you know, there was a kind of it was there and it was suppressed. I mean, obviously the segregationists and people like that, but their rhetoric at least sounded. It wasn't like they were celebrating sadism. It was almost like they were, you know, apologizing for it or something like that. It's just, but now it's being celebrated, which means that, you know, young people or people who are just like on the edge, just a little marginally sadistic, you know, they just like to kick their dog. Now suddenly they feel empowered and they've come out fully and they're out on the streets and they're everywhere and it's turned into a movement basically. Mike, I got to move along, but thank you for the call.
Okay,
thanks for your observations. Good talking to you. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom, not too much. Hey, I oppose Trump supporters politically so much. I'm almost reluctant to tell them this, but I could really help them if they would listen, because I kind of went through the same thing in my career when George Bush was president.
You're talking about the 25 years you served in military intelligence?
Yes, and it was during Bush's second term my career really plummeted downhill. But luckily I had enough time in I could retire. Okay, but anyways, that's another thing. Yeah, I know you're familiar with the Stanford prison experiment, right? And
yeah, but you might want to recap it in a sentence or two for our listeners.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the Milgram experiment, the progressive shocks? Stanley Milgram?
No, I'm talking about. No. I'm talking about Phil Zimbardo, and where he argued that fascism just happens if the environment is right. If the environment is correct, people will tend to go towards what we call fascism or authoritarianism.
Right. And it requires a healthy dose of fear and poor economic circumstances.
Yes. Long story short, Trump voters would be the prison guards, okay, and they would prefer a firm hand, okay, and to make for survival reasons, right? Now, having said that, I listened to a lot of right-wing radio. Now, I heard a guy on, I'm not going to say the show, but he was this climate science denier and a Trump supporter, okay? He said he was a scientist. Now, I kind of think he just had a college education in chemistry. I don't think he was an actual scientist. But anyways, he was going through the typical talking points, right-wing talking points, right? And he was doing a great job, really, you know? But then it got to a caller called in about Greta Thunberg, right? And this guy went off the rails. Now he started becoming very agitated, and he, instead of saying portend, he started saying portrend. Portrend. He got the word wrong. He was just saying it correctly before. And I'm like, aha, I know what that's about. And what it is, it comes down to what we call toxic online disinhibition. Now, there is benign online disinhibition, and I think I have that. I have that problem a little bit.
Disinhibition is what happens when you drink too much. I mean, in the minds of most people, you lose your inhibition. You're more likely to behave in ways you wouldn't normally. That's what we're talking about here?
Yes, and inhibition is evolutionary, all right? And without getting into the whole, anthropology and everything.
No, and it also has to do with growing up. As you know, the end point of maturing in your early 20s is when you learn how to inhibit impulses and behaviors fully. and that's typically, being an adult.
Yes, and it's a survival mechanism. We have inhibitions, even though we don't like them for a reason. Now, when he started rejecting his inhibitions, that's the disinhibition, he started making vocal errors and mistakes. All right. Now, I was thinking about this, and it's really because Greta Thunberg, what is it about her that agitates Trump and Trump supporters so much? It's because she is not, all right, she suffers from autism. In their mind, in the Stanford prison experiment, she is not accepting her place. She is being uppity, for lack of a better word.
Well, she's also a woman, and she's 16 years old. And she's not a U.S. citizen. She's a foreigner.
Well, they're attacking her, and deep down inside, they know it's wrong. Now, I will come to my main point because I would love to get your take on it. There's a philosopher, Hannah Arendt, who lived through Nazi Germany, okay? Yep. She said that in America, we have a firewall against tyranny. She said basically things that motivate, she called them men of action. We have people that will act on things that other people around the world won't act on, like these concepts of individual liberty and everything. Well, the Trump supporters would be more inclined to take action. Right now, they're acting on an authoritarian impulse. My question to you is, do you believe, if push comes to shove, or like I fear Russia and China will take advantage of this, if things really, do you think they will default back to preservation of liberty and the tenets this country was founded upon? Or do you believe they will, go ahead.
Or do I believe that we'll just slide into fascism? Is that where you were going?
Yeah, or will they just say, to heck with it, all my action, I'm going to go towards authoritarianism?
Yeah, that's going to be the big question. And, I keep reminding people, in 1933, the Great Depression hit the United States and Germany equally hard. Germany maybe even a little harder, because they had lost World War I and they had reparations under the Treaty of Versailles. But basically, we were both being hurt economically. We had FDR, they had Adolf Hitler. And, we all know how that worked out, right? It was hitting Italy, too, and they had Mussolini. And so I think that leadership matters. I think that circumstances matter. I think context matters. And I think that is probably the strongest argument for doing absolutely everything we can to make sure that no matter who the Democratic nominee is, that person defeats Donald Trump in 2016. And no matter who the Democrats may be running in congressional and senatorial races at both the federal and state level, that we do everything we can to get them elected, because the Democratic Party at least has not gone insane like the Republican Party has. Dave, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So are Trump supporters merely misinformed, or are they authoritarians? Are they at their core kind of rough? And welcome back. Joshua in Hollywood, listening to KPFK. Hey, Joshua, what's up?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to say something real fast. That the Trump supporters are definitely under some kind of mind control, because there's no way that you can see what presidents do. I'm not just talking about Trump. But anyway, and I wanted to say also, that guy said that Soylent Green, look up Signal Mix, okay? Signal Mix. It's been researched, and yes, the aborted baby fetuses are going into the food. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, all right. I don't know if I'm being punked. I'm assuming I am. But there actually is this thing called human composting, and they're about to legalize it in Washington State. Maybe they already have, which is what burials used to be, basically. Grass always, grew really well in graveyards, but now you can be composted. And, if somebody uses that compost and grows vegetables. Anyway, Jeffrey in Des Moines, Iowa. Hey, Jeffrey, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Yeah, presidential republics, especially in Africa and South America, often turn into executive dictatorships and personality cults. And so
in South America as well.
The GOP as,
Well, in Europe, too, for that matter. I mean, that's Orban in Hungary and Duda in Poland.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's not just for presidential republics. I think the alarming thing, though, if you read, The Fall of Democracy, the book about the fall of Weimar by Benjamin Carter Head, is two things that the GOP a few years ago realized that they could just lie. They could just sort of invent reality, and they could say anything. Right. And they would have the whole artillery of talk radio and also Fox News behind them, but they would also have corporate media and NPR and the so-called liberal media consistently presenting sides of stories, this false relativism where 2 plus 2 equals 4 and 2 plus 2 equals 5. And that's a toxic combination, because if our corporate media and even our so-called liberal media are not looking and digging for facts rather than presenting everything as some opinion, this kind of toxicity, spreads even further. So I think, but quick question for you. I try to say, Gaddafi, some part of Mugabe. There's some other leaders, but I'm not sure really who to compare him to, because there's also an element of celebrity culture that is unique to us.
So what was the question?
Well, in terms of who you might compare Trump and this personality cult to, like another leader, current leader, or somebody in history who behaves like him, because Gaddafi had I wouldn't
go to Gaddafi. I would compare him to Modi or Duterte or Orban. The difference, and Orban is still holding rallies that poll thousands of people, and his rallies are very much like Trump's rallies. But the difference is that Trump is not as competent as those guys. Which is, in a weird kind of way, the one thing that's probably saving our republic, or at least some fragments of our republic. If Trump had been a competent administrator, in addition to being a sociopath and having narcissistic personality disorder, like these other guys are, then we would be much farther down the road of fascism right now than we are. And my concern is that if he gets reelected, basically the Republican Party is going to close ranks around him, and you're going to end up not with incompetent bumblers in the White House, but rather with some very, very competent people who are just going to aggressively start stripping the institutions of this country. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Nick in Cliffside Park, New Jersey. Hey, Nick, what's up?
Hey, Tom. This is an excellent question that you raised, or I should say a set of questions that ideally, if we survive long enough, over the next 50, 60 years, probably hundreds, if not thousands of books and treatises will be written covering all angles of this. Yeah. Obviously, in a brief phone call, I can just cover a few. And I would put it a slightly different way, to really question the idea of what we understand to be evil. Can evil actually be truly conscious in the full sense of the word conscious? And I would say the answer is no, and I'm not the first to say that. It's an old kind of...
Go back and read Hannah Arendt, the banality of evil.
There you go. The thing is this, the way I see it is that highly motivated, active minorities will always dominate over dispirited, passive, and frightened majorities. So just because Trump has a relative minority of the population with him doesn't mean that they can't actually, quote, win in terms of the politics and economics of our society. So the solution to that is not for us to become angry or hateful or afraid. The answer is for all of us to understand that the way to defeat and to I don't want to use the word fight, the way to respond to Trumpism is actually with love. And it's not easy. In the Christian theology, there's the concept of love thine enemies. Mm-hmm. And it's not easy. But that's what's really needed, because the more they drag us in to their world of anger and fear and hatred, Trumpism feeds off of that. But one of the things,
Nick, I get that, and in principle, I completely agree with you. But did you ever read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Scherer?
Yes, long time ago when I was a teenager.
There's at least 100 pages in that book, scattered through that book, of his talking about movements that rose up not to fight against Hitler and the Nazis, but to try to reform them, to try to appeal to them, to try to moderate them, to try to, get along and go along for a little while in the hope that they could be reformed. And in the end, most of those people were put to death.
I take that point. And when I talk about love, I'm not talking about, I don't know how to put this. I'm not talking about something weak or trying to, like you say, moderate them.
So how do you fight Mitch McConnell with love, for example? I would fight him by promoting Amy McGrath, the woman who's running against him in the for the Senate in Kentucky.
Right, pragmatic progressivism, by actually becoming fully involved politically, actively, and asserting the evolutionary over reacting to the devolutionary.
Right. It seems like that's the strongest thing.
In practical terms, to hardcore politics. I think that every one of us has unique things that each one of us can do that are homeopathically powerful. No, nothing is too small. Everything counts. If you see somebody at the supermarket line that and was in high school with you, and they start, and they're wearing a MAGA cap, and you talk to them, just let them know that you don't approve in a loving way, in a kind way.
Yeah.
And those little actions cumulatively will add up to winning.
So if you see somebody in a MAGA hat, you would say something like, I'm sure you're probably a really nice person, but that hat and everything that it stands for is something that I find really offensive. Is that what you're talking about?
Did you notice nobody uses bumper stickers anymore, either they're pro-Trump or anti-Trump?
Oh, it's because people are afraid of their cars getting keyed or rear-ended or whatever. That's what it has come to. Nick, I got to move along. I want to get another caller in here, but thank you for the call. You made some great points. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike.
Yeah, a couple of universal tendencies. When I was a child, we had chickens and an egg farm sort of going on. I noticed that when one of the chicks in the brooder house would get a little speck of blood on them, all the other chicks would start to peck at it until the chick was no more. And being an elementary school age child, I sort of noticed how similar that was to kids, and how when one person is an outcast, all the rest of the kids will tend to gang up on them because they want to be on the winning side. So that's a universal potential for everyone, which plays very well into Nazis and Trumpsters and all.
Well, and what you're describing is something that we call bullying.
Yes, but it comes out as a group dynamic.
Right. Right. Yeah. My point. I remember Dennis, the bully in my elementary school. And who used to terrorize me and a bunch of other kids. But he had this crowd of people who followed him and hung out with him. And in fact, I hung out with him for a couple of weeks, and then he turned on me. I mean, it was just it was weird.
The other tendency is to lie, and people who don't work at being honest and know that they are dishonest will tend to worship somebody who achieves a position of great respect or authority through lying. Oh, by the way, tomorrow evening, everybody, moveon.org.
Yeah.
Impeach Trump rallies.
5:30 p.m. Yep. Absolutely. 5:30 p.m. tomorrow. Not just Move On, Public Citizen. I mean, there's a whole bunch of groups.
In on it.
Yeah, I'll be talking about that as we continue through the show. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate the call. We'll be right back.
Fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmerman and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmerman and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, "Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates," end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. "A slave is as good as gold," Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America, The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
It should not have been entitled to. Most of the senior members of Kushner's companies knew what was going on. The book by Vicki Ward, Kushner, Inc., Greed, Ambition, Corruption.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We will continue our conversation about Trump supporters in a few minutes, and I've got a few things to add to that as well. But right now on the line with us is former Congressman Alan Grayson, our old buddy. He represented the 9th District of Florida. He has a new book out. It's called High Crimes, The Impeachment of Donald Trump. And you can tweet him at Alan Grayson. Congressman, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
It's great having you with us. Tell us about the book.
Well, the book is an historical review of every single American who has ever been impeached, measuring up their crimes and misdemeanors against Donald Trump's. And honestly, objectively, being dispassionate about this, Trump is worse than every single one of them.
And you
can find historical analogies, but he's worse than all of them.
I mean, you're going through people like Alcee Hastings, Sir Francis Bacon, John C. Calhoun, Spiro Agnew. I'm looking at the table of contents of your book. It's wow. So guilty. Let's start with bribery. That's I believe that's the first part of your book.
Yes, but there's closer historical analogies to what's happening right now. You know who Rod Blagojevich is.
Yeah.
Did you know that one of the reasons why Rod Blagojevich was put out of office is because of something very similar to what Trump did in Ukraine?
You mean why he lost the election, or why he was impeached, or why he was sent to prison?
Yes, he was impeached and sent to prison for selling the Senate appointment that Barack Obama made available to him when Barack was elevated to the presidency.
Correct.
But he was also impeached and convicted, Blagojevich that is. He was also impeached and convicted because there was a reporter at the Chicago Tribune that he really hated. The Chicago Tribune parent company wanted a $150 million loan from the state. Is this starting to sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
And he would not allow the loan until they fired that reporter. He was impeached, convicted, and removed from office because of that.
Whoa. And Trump is talking about pardoning him right now, by the way.
That's right. Two birds of a feather flock together.
Yeah.
I'll give you another example. A governor of Texas was impeached and removed from office. He had a political opponent, someone who ran against him, like Biden is trying to run against Trump. And what happened with him was that after he lost the election, he joined the University of Texas as a member of the journalism school. Ferguson was very upset about this. In order to get back at him, he zeroed out the entire budget, vetoed the entire budget for the University of Texas because they refused to fire him. Wow. These are the kinds of abuse of power that you see through history that Trump is engaged in by withholding $400 million plus from Ukraine unless they investigated Biden.
Yeah. And well, he's also, I mean, he's withholding money from a lot of federal agencies, but I think that's more, he's just pursuing a kind of, cokehead agenda, cutting back on the EPA and auctioning off more federal lands and, cutting up our national parks and all these kinds of things. I'm not sure those are impeachable. Oh, yeah. Those are more like he's back to Reaganism. But what do you see as? I mean, that's a fairly clear one, and in fact, from the House committee today, they I'm trying to find this here. I had it just a minute ago. They actually, I remember. It's right here. No, it's not. Okay, so anyhow, the House committee stuff was, the report just came out overnight, basically, and it explicitly says that Donald Trump committed the crimes of bribery and wire fraud. Your thoughts on that?
Well, that's true, and it's not the only time either. But bear in mind that in order to commit a constitutional high crime or misdemeanor, you simply have to abuse the privilege of office or do something that means that you should not be in a position of honor and trust under the Constitution. It's not necessary that he be found guilty of a specific crime in the criminal code. The fact that you have the position is enough to give you that kind of exposure and have you subject to being impeached for high crimes. And it is a high crime. Only the President of the United States can do what he did, withhold money from a foreign government unless they intervene and try to investigate one of his political opponents. That is what makes it a high crime. It doesn't make any difference if it's a low crime under the Constitution, meaning a crime that's subject to the criminal code.
Right. Well, and at the time that the Constitution was written, there literally was no criminal code. That's
true too.
That's what Congress started doing in 1789 when they first convened, was create the criminal code. But impeachment was already there in the document. So the highest law of the land was the Constitution, and at the very beginning of our country, it was the only law of the land.
Right. The Constitution specifically says that treason and bribery, treason being defined in the Constitution, are bases for removing someone from office, impeaching and convicting him and removing him from office. But then there's the broader category of high crimes and misdemeanors. And misdemeanors aren't things that you have to be president to do. For instance, over and over again, we've had people impeached or removed from office for misconduct that you don't have to be a federal judge or a president or a vice president to do. Things like, for instance, tax evasion. Things like, for instance, sexual misconduct. Eric Greitens, the governor of Missouri, was removed from office just 2 years ago for sexual misconduct with one woman. And now Trump, what is the number now based upon the new book that came out? He's in the 70s 20. Now, right?
In the 70s?
No. Right. My book documents 35 cases of sexual misconduct by Trump, but there's another book out right now that goes much higher than that.
I guess it's about 20 women. About 20 women who are actually suing him.
Quite a number suing him, but there's been many more documented cases of this, and Greitens was removed from office because of sexual misconduct with one woman.
Which raises an interesting question. The Bill Clinton impeachment, at least the final phase of it, began in a really big way with Paula Jones suing Bill Clinton in civil court. It wasn't a criminal indictment. It was a civil indictment. And that led to the discovery of Monica Lewinsky, and, the rest was history. What's the status of these 20-some-odd lawsuits by various women against Donald Trump? Have they all been put on hold because he's president? I mean, the Paula Jones lawsuit was certainly not put on hold.
No, but actually what Clinton was actually impeached for was not the allegations in the lawsuit, but rather his supposed obstruction. And again, in Clinton's case, we're talking about obstruction in a civil case not related to his professional conduct, in which Clinton allegedly got two witnesses to testify or attempted to get them to testify differently from what they would have otherwise testified on the truth. In Trump's case, there's dozens. And these dozens are because he, as President of the United States, has ordered them not to testify. there's a far stronger case for obstruction of justice against Trump than there's been literally against anybody, against Clinton or against anybody else of the 3 or 4 or 5 people who faced obstruction of justice charges in our history.
We're talking with former Florida Congressman Alan Grayson. He's got a new book out. It's called High Crimes, The Impeachment of Donald Trump. Available wherever you get books, fine books. And
impeachbook.com. It'll be live later today.
Oh, cool.
Impeachbook.com.
Impeachbook.com. And,
right.
You've done a brilliant job of explicating this in both your book and just in the last 10 minutes here on this program, with your essentially lawyer and historian hats on. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask you to put on your politician hat. You swam in our political waters for some time and did so rather well and rather famously. In particular, you're going after the Republicans for their health care policy. Don't get sick, and if you do, die quick. How do you see this playing out politically? We've got the House of Representatives is presumably going to have a vote on Wednesday. Huge rallies all across the United States Tuesday night being put on by Indivisible and a bunch of other groups, Move On and so forth. 5:30 wherever you are locally across the country, check it out. But how do you see this playing out Wednesday in the House and then in January in the Senate?
Well, let me point out a couple of things. First, historically, Andrew Johnson was impeached and survived by one vote in the Senate. And people don't realize this, but 6 weeks afterward, the Democratic Party, his party, had a national convention, and he ran for re-election and got 1/7 of the vote in his own convention 6 weeks after he just narrowly escaped impeachment and conviction. He was politically hurt and held accountable by the impeachment, even though it didn't end in his conviction and removal from office. The same thing is true of Richard Nixon. I mean, you could see the polls week by week and month by month. As the case was laid out against Richard Nixon in public through the impeachment proceedings, his polling got worse and worse. In fact, it ended up not too far away from where we are already with Donald Trump. At the time of his actual removal from office, 58% of the public thought that he should be impeached or removed. We are now consistently seeing polls regarding Trump's impeachment removal that are above 50%.
Right. So, and it was only 42% in July of last year. It was only 42%. And that's what makes me crazy. In 6 months, it's gone from 42% to 50% for both impeaching and removing from office. And yet the media keeps saying, well, all this work that Democrats are doing isn't moving the polls. Sure looks like it is to me.
Well, not only that, I mean, there are harbinger polls that are much older than that. 2 years ago, there was a poll that was done, a national public poll that was done that said, should Donald Trump be impeached or removed from office because of his sexual misconduct? 52% of Americans said yes 2 years ago.
Whoa. So how does this play out in the Senate?
Well, it can play out one of two ways. It can play out where the Republicans try to treat this as a political exercise, and they remain in line, and they do what Trump wants them to do. And there have been some cases of that historically, but by far what's happened primarily historically is that the Senate, even when dealing with the 3 presidential impeachments that we've had that have gotten through Congress, they even with regard to those, typically it has not been a party line vote. Typically what's happened is that people in the Senate treat it like what it is, that they're jurors trying to decide a case against the president.
But both McConnell and Lindsey Graham,
either way.
McConnell runs the Senate, Lindsey Graham runs the Judiciary Committee. Both of them have said they don't, their minds are already made up and they're not going to let Trump get impeached, period, full stop.
We'll see. I mean, McConnell has been known to change his mind, and he had a powerful reason to do that this week, because this week the new Democratic governor of Kentucky restored voting rights to the 27% of African-American men who don't have the right to vote in Kentucky or didn't before this week because they were convicted felons. That's going to be a hard time for McConnell next year when he's on the ballot and runs for re-election. We'll see how he really feels if he wants Trump on the ballot with him.
Plus, Amy McGrath is a hell of a candidate. I mean, she's really something. Congressman Alan Grayson, his new book, High Crimes, The Impeachment of Donald Trump, impeachbook.com is the website. Congressman, thank you for dropping by.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Great talking with you again.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 18 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, I was contemplating, how does Trump get 42% of the vote? I figured it out. Because the economy for the lower and middle class is so bad, and all his promises of fruits of the tree keep dragging in more people.
Yeah. Yeah, whenever anybody says, a Trump supporter says the economy is great, I think the appropriate rebuttal is, well, while you're trying to pay for your medications and your rent is going up and your pay is not, the stock market sure has exploded. You getting a piece of that action? And typically, I think the answer would be no.
Yeah, well, that's the problem, because we don't point that out, Yeah. And what he does with the farmers, he gives them subsidies,
Yeah.
No other president did.
I got it. Corky, thank you. Good points all. Robbie in Portland. Hey, Robbie, what's up?
I had a few points to get to. First, when you brought up Thomas Bowers at the beginning of the show, the lawyer from Donald Trump who suicided himself.
Yeah.
I think you forgot to mention he was also Epstein's lawyer. For those that don't believe in conspiracy.
Oh, really? Was he a?
Yeah.
But he worked as a banker. I mean, or he worked for Deutsche Bank.
Deutschland Bank. Yeah. Exactly. He was Epstein's lawyer, and I think he suicided himself about a week and a half ago. But the whole
several weeks ago.
Thing, it was kind of funny. I wanted to say another caller had brought up, the conspiracies, and it's weird that in our day and age, in our world, the word conspiracy, if I were to bring up just the word conspiracy, people kind of automatically think it's not real, which is really weird to me because, anyway. But
well, it's a crime. I mean, I think, Trump engaged in a criminal conspiracy to defraud the American people and the Ukrainians.
Exactly. It's just the very notion of the word has been altered to, the mass media, I feel like.
Well, you attach the word theory to the end of it, and you're right. It becomes a pejorative.
Yeah.
We need to replace the word.
I'll get to the question.
Yeah.
I'll get to the question. Trump's, the voters, are they all bad? I actually speak a lot to them. I think I mentioned before, I confront Joey Gibson out here at the Patriot Prayer. Every time that he comes down to one of the rallies, I always make an effort to go down there. And basically, and this is what I wanted to tell you, is I don't think all of them are bad. I don't believe all Trump voters are bad. I think a lot of them are misled. I think a lot of them, as a lot of them succumb to fear. A lot of them are just working class people that, you have a person like Joey Gibson come out on a stage and say, hey, this person, they're taking your job. This is why you're working harder. This is why you don't get money, and then they just get misled. So that's why I think it's actually really critical to engage with these Trump voters. And what I use, and I don't expect everybody to believe in God or preach Bible, but I would recommend anybody, who has that Trump uncle or the Trump family member that they're going to have to encounter, go read up some quick Bible verses. Radical Christianity is a subreddit. You can learn so much, which points out, word for word, the hypocrisy of the right when they claim to be for either it's patriotism or American freedom. We can use the tools and the ideologies that they have against them to wake them up just a little bit and find those people who are just being.
Yeah, just read Matthew 5-7 and Matthew 25. I mean, it's all right there. The Sermon on the Mount and the story, the parable of the goats and the sheep. Robbie, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back, and thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The hidden history of the Supreme Court and the betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Check it out. It's available over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A few other things in the news, but and also apropos to the conversation we're having right now about the nature of Trump supporters. Robert De Niro just came out and gave a little riff, and actually it was a week or so ago. It's been made into a meme, which is now circulating on social media. He says the president is supposed to set an example of trying to do the right thing, not to be a nasty little B word. Instead, that's what he is. He's a petulant little punk. There's not one thing I see in him or his family, not any redeeming qualities. They're out on the take. It's like a gangster family. And it's something probably we should think about. For example, gangsters, they surround themselves with people who are loyal to them. Listen to this. This is from Cousin IT over at Democratic Underground. Actually, it's Carolyn Zhang writing at citizensforethics.org. President Trump's handpicked IRS Commissioner, Charles Rettig, earns as much as $1 million in rental income from the Trump-branded properties he co-owns while facing demands from Congress to release Trump's tax returns. When Trump nominated Rettig to lead the IRS in February of 2018, Rettig initially failed to disclose that the Hawaii real estate he owned was at a Trump-branded property. And this, of course, at the very least, raises serious ethics questions. I've mentioned the 200,000 voters that the judge in Wisconsin wants to knock off the voting rolls. Here's another one. Donald Trump says that not yet. He thinks that he's going to skip the debate. He says 3 years ago, they were forced to publicly apologize for modulating my microphone in the first debate against crooked Hillary. As president, the debates are up to me. I'll make a decision at an appropriate time, but in the meantime, the Commission on Presidential Debates is not authorized to speak for me or the Republicans. Methinks Donald Trump is afraid of a debate, which is another interesting question. Do you think that the debates would hurt Trump or help him? I mean, it was debates that made him the Republican nominee. And I think you could say, although after every one of his 3 debates with Hillary Clinton, his popularity went down and hers went up, the difference was just small. I mean, it was 1 or 2 points. None of them had huge swings. On the other hand, it'll have been 4 years, and the guy is, getting deep into his 70s now. And he's starting to have these episodes where his speech gets slurred and he forgets what he's saying, or he can't pronounce words like origins, comes out as oranges. He may be thinking, and he may be right, that going into a debate under those circumstances would be a bad idea. What do you think?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back. It's 27 minutes, coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you, fair and only slightly unbalanced. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Measuring What Counts, the Global Movement for Well-Being by Joe Stiglitz, Jean-Paul Fitoussi, and Martine Duran. And this is from the first chapter labeled Overview. The high-level expert group on the measurement of economic performance and social progress, also known as HLEG, builds on the analyses and recommendations of the 2009 Commission on the Measurement of Economic Performance and Social Progress, also known as the Stiglitz-Sen-Fitoussi Commission, in highlighting the role of well-being metrics in policy and encouraging a more active dialogue among economic theory and statistical practice. The report makes explicit the often implicit assumptions hidden in statistical practices and their real-world consequences. Its central message is that what we measure affects what we do. If we measure the wrong thing, we will do the wrong thing. If we don't measure something, it becomes neglected, as if the problem didn't exist. There is no simple way of representing every aspect of well-being in a single number in the way GDP describes market economic output. This has led to GDP being used as a proxy for both economic welfare, like people's command over commodities, and general welfare, which also depends on people's attributes and non-market activities. GDP was not designed for this task. We need to move beyond GDP when assessing a country's health and complement GDP with a broader dashboard of indicators that would reflect the distribution of well-being in society and its sustainability across the social, economic, and environmental dimensions. Excuse me. The challenge is to make the dashboard small enough to be easily comprehensible, but large enough to summarize what we care about the most. The 2008 crisis and its aftermath illustrate why a change in perspective is needed. The GDP loss that followed the crisis was not the temporary one-off event predicted by conventional macroeconomic models. Its effects have lasted over time, suggesting that the crisis caused the permanent loss of significant amounts of capital, not just machines and structures, but also hidden capital in the form of lower on-the-job training, permanent scars on young people entering the labor market during a recession, and lower trust in an economic system rigged to benefit a few. Different metrics, including better measurements of people's economic insecurity, could have shown that the consequences of the recession were much deeper than the GDP statistics indicated, and governments might have responded more strongly to mitigate the negative impacts of the crisis. If, on the basis of GDP, the economy is perceived to be well on the road to recovery, as many governments believed in 2010, one would not take the strong policy measures needed to support people's living conditions suggested by metrics that inform on whether most of the population still feels in recession. Nor would one take measures to bolster the safety net and social protection in the absence of metrics on the extent of people's economic insecurity. These failings in the policy responses to the crisis were compounded by overly focusing on the consequences of public spending and raising government's liabilities, when this spending could take the form of investment, increasing the assets in governments and countries' balance sheets. The same follows when measures of unemployment do not reflect the full extent of a country's unused labor resources. The beyond GDP agenda is sometimes characterized as anti-growth, but this is not the case. The use of a dashboard of indicators reflecting what we value as a society would have led, most likely, to stronger GDP growth than that actually achieved by most countries after 2008. This book also looks at progress in implementing the recommendations of the Stiglitz-Sen-Fitoussi Commission since 2009, identifying areas that require increased focus by statistical agencies, researchers, and policymakers. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, agreed by the international community in 2015, clearly go far beyond GDP. But their 169 policy targets and more than 200 indicators for global monitoring are too many to guide policies. Countries will have to identify their priorities within the broader UN agenda and upgrade their statistical capacities, which, even in developed countries, are insufficient to monitor whether the agreed-upon commitments are being met. The international community should invest in upgrading the statistical capacity of developing countries, especially in areas where country data are needed to assess global phenomena, such as climate change or the world distribution of income. Inequality in income and wealth has today a central role in policy discussions in ways it did not in 2009. But important progress is still needed in a range of areas, such as measuring what happens at both ends of the income distribution, integrating different data sources, and measuring the joint distribution of income, consumption, and wealth at the individual level. When looking at inequality, it's also important to look at differences between groups. These are called horizontal inequalities, at inequalities within households, and the way resources are shared and managed, which are especially important in the case of wealth. We should also look beyond inequality in outcomes to inequality of opportunity. Inequality of opportunity is even more unacceptable than inequality of outcomes. But the operational distinction between the two is fuzzy, as we don't observe all circumstances that shape people's outcomes and are independent of their efforts. The book Measuring What Counts by Joe Stiglitz and friends. Thank you. On the Science Revolution this week is the real science of Santa Claus. Would you believe it if I told you that Santa was on a psychedelic high? Plus, Ron Jackson is here about the Carbon Project you should know about. Behold the Trump crime family's disrespect of life and humanity in geeky science. And don't miss the good, the bad, and the very, very ugly, plus the fact of the week, letting us know about the end of fish. So one by one, Democrats who were elected in districts that went to Trump are coming out in favor of impeachment. The most recent is Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan, and a Democrat from Michigan in a district that was heavily, went for Trump. She used to be a CIA analyst. And she said, I took a step back, looked at the full body of available information, and tried to make an objective decision on my vote. And then, she goes through. She actually wrote an op-ed for the Detroit Free Press laying out exactly why she voted and how she's voting. I'm not sure that we can expect the same from any Republican, whether in the House or the Senate. We'll find out on Wednesday. There is a debate within the Democratic caucus about whether they should include any Republicans, if any are willing. Perhaps Justin Amash of Michigan, although he got kicked out of the party, basically, when he came out in favor of impeaching Trump over the Mueller report. But I think having Justin Amash participate in this thing would be a really, really strong idea. Michael in Denver. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah, I called up and I just said that it's a question of memory for me, in my opinion. It has a lot to do with memory.
What are you talking about?
Let me just tell you. Well, I'll pose this to you. I have a relative. I'm of Cuban, amongst other nationalities, descent. After the revolution, my family took in 6 or 8 of our relatives that fled Cuba. Mm-hmm. And in particular, there's one who's a little older than I am, 70 years old. He came here basically with the shirt on his back. Over the course of time, living in Florida, he rose to great heights. And at this point in time, he's a multi-millionaire, maybe a billionaire. I don't really know. Mm-hmm. But when he started, he came here and he took advantage of just about everything: public education, his health, everything, and also work. He started off modestly and he rose the ladder. At the beginning, I think, just like anybody that says the American dream, will give me this opportunity to get to that.
Right.
He forgot about it completely. He has forgotten about it. He has grandchildren that went out, and he literally has shunted them away from the family because they're progressives, they're Democrats. They worked in elections to try to get people elected in Florida.
So are you saying, Michael, when you say that the people who are Trump supporters have a problem with memory, that they don't remember all the good things the Democrats have done for America, from Social Security to Medicare to Medicaid to the 8-hour day to long-term unemployment insurance to is that what you're talking about? Public universities and education and
not exactly.
Championing schools?
Right. Not exactly. They have chosen to forget that. They have chosen because of their success, their affluence, and the influence that they now have. they have decided to forget all of that. Lay it aside. This is not the world that I'm from anymore. I'm from this world, and I'm going to be entrenched here. I'm going to plant my flag here. This is what I believe. There was a book called True Believers, and I read it a long time ago. But it was in the book. I remember similar things that were in that book that I've seen happen within our family because of this overriding. We're not part of this anymore.
Right.
We don't care. We don't donate to.
He's shifted his mindset out of a we society and into believing in the ideal of a me society, which has never worked anywhere in the world. A libertarian society, basically.
He is the me society, and I'll tell you, authoritarian in his businesses and everything. When I went to visit, I would go to a bank that he owned, several car dealerships that he owned, and I could see that the employees, when he was there, were really, really just boxed in. Do not create.
Terrified.
Don't come up with anything. Passively terrified because, of course, they have smiles on their face, and he's the boss. And Don Fernando, his name is Fernando. That's his real name, not his last name.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned the rise and fall of the world of the Third Reich. That to me is like the Bible.
Yeah, it's an amazing book, and too many Americans have not read it. I mean, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, it was typically part of high school curriculum. I don't think anybody is reading it anymore. I'm guessing in the 80s it got stripped out of our schools along with all the other reforms of Reagan.
Lastly, he doesn't know Matthew 5:7.
Yeah.
If he read it, I'd be surprised.
Yeah, there you go.
So,
Michael, thank you.
You and your family have a very healthy and safe holiday for all of us. But thank you for everything you do, Tom.
Thank you, Michael, and happy holidays, Merry Christmas, whatever's appropriate for you. Thank you so much for the call. Devin in Houston, Texas. Hey, Devin, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? Great show as always.
Thank you. What's on your mind?
There's a core of the Republican Party that's half of it is right-wing nationalism, and the other part are authoritarian neo-Calvinists who want to be ruled by the very rich people we're criticizing. So what I think you have to show them that they aren't the majority. We have to come out in such a wave and crush them politically. I don't think you can show them love or be nice or compromise with them. They see it as weakness.
Right.
They have to be shown politically that they aren't stronger than us. That, in my opinion, that's the only way to change them.
I think you may be right, Devin. And if you look at other cult personalities, and other cults of personality, for example, the Nazi cult around Hitler, the emperor worship cult around Hirohito in World War II, their followers, their true believers, did not wake up, as it were, until the movement was just absolutely politically smashed. Now, of course, it was smashed with a war, but it was smashed, and they woke up in a disillusioned state. But that's what it took, and the problem that I see is in the 20s. You had Harding and then Coolidge and then Hoover all preaching this basically trickle-down economics, Reaganism. They were preaching that the government should be unregulated. Harding ran in 1920 for president on a platform of more business in government, less government in business. In other words, privatize and deregulate. And cutting taxes. The top tax rate when he came into office was 91%. He cut it to 25%, just like Reagan did. That ideology during the Roaring 20s was widely adopted across the United States. And it took the crash of 1929 to wake people up to how toxic that Republican ideology was. And as a result, the Republican Party didn't hold the United States House of Representatives for more than a 2-year period twice, but they basically had no majority in the House of Representatives from 1933 until 1995. I mean, 3 generations, arguably 4 generations. And the Republican Party had been crushed, had been smashed by the great crash of 1929. When Reagan came into power, he flipped our party, our country both economically and politically. And we have been living in this Reaganism era. It's been even large aspects of the Reagan agenda were adopted by two of our two Democratic presidents since then, and it has led to this, to Trump, among other things. But also, it's wiping out the middle class. But there hasn't been a smashing. I mean, the Reagan Revolution was kind of in the background. It was soft. It was largely the result of the Supreme Court in '76 and '78 allowing massive amounts of cash to flow into the political system, which put Reagan into the White House. Along with the illegal deal that he cut with the Iranians to hold the hostages to hurt Jimmy Carter. But none of that was publicly known until years later. And then when Bill Barr in '92 was Attorney General, he covered up the entire Iran-Contra investigation by counseling President Bush the Elder to pardon, all of the Iran-Contra conspirators. So we haven't had another great shock like we had in 1929.
Yeah, that's like after the Civil War when they were like, no, don't execute these people.
Yeah.
Not physically execute them, but politically, we have to finish them. You can't just say, okay, those guys learn their lesson. No, you have to destroy them. This is the only way to fix it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to what you're saying, Devin, which means get everybody Devin, thanks for the call. Get everybody registered to vote. Make sure they're registered to vote. If you're in Wisconsin and you get your vote registration taken away from you, which is, if this judge's ruling stands, is going to happen, particularly if you live in Madison or Milwaukee, double check or fight it or, talk back to them or whatever, get it back on.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Same thing in Georgia. You got Stacey Abrams down there leading the charge against Brian Kemp's voter suppression. It's happening in pretty much every Republican-controlled state in the country. And welcome back. Laura in Champaign, Illinois. Hey, Laura, thank you for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Yeah, these Trump supporters are a wide variety of personalities. And I think that some of them will be able to see the truth in what's going on. And they will be persuaded to vote against Trump in the next election. But these supporters, in general, remind me of football fans who support their teams
no matter what.
No matter what. Yeah. And some of these are just curious, the people who go to these rallies.
Yeah.
It reminds me of people going to a football game.
Yeah, but there's
watching their team.
There's a real consequential difference. I was a fan of the Detroit Tigers. I have been all my life. I grew up in Michigan, and they're a great baseball team, and I love to watch their games. They lost for decades, and you continue to support them. It doesn't hurt the nation. It didn't hurt the state, but supporting Trump is actually something that is destructive to America, in my opinion.
But their personalities are similar, I think. These people, there are people who go to these rallies, and I'm sure that they're just curious, some of these people.
Well, there's a small core of them that actually go from... Yeah, there is. It's like the Grateful Dead. There's actually a core, and there's a debate about how many people it is. It's a tightly held secret in Trump land. But whether it's 5% of the audience or whether it's 50% of the audience, he's got a group that follow him from rally to rally, just like the Grateful Dead had, the people who followed them. That just like this hardcore. They're like Jim Jones fans.
Oh, absolutely. But what I'm trying to say is, I think that there's a wide variety of personalities who are Trump supporters, for various reasons. And they cheer the violence in the football games. These the analogy I'm trying to make here, and they cheer when someone gets an especially hard tackle, and they will support their team no matter if they're winning or losing.
Yeah.
And, when over 60% of the Trump supporters say that they would support him no matter what, it's very disturbing. And, that's how I view them, that, that there's just a variety of personalities.
And there was a remarkable study. Yeah, there was a remarkable study that came out a couple of weeks ago, I think maybe last week, that found that 40% of registered Republican voters say that if Donald Trump wants to do something over the objections of Congress or the Supreme Court, he should be allowed to.
Right.
That's called dictatorship.
No matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah. But,
literally.
Again, if there are some borderline Trump supporters out there who can be, persuaded to see the truth and vote against him, we need to reach out to those people. You're right.
I agree, Laura. I agree. But that 40%, that's a shocking number. I figured it would have been half that or even a fifth of that. Laura, thank you for the call. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and picking up your phone calls. Jane in Joshua Tree, California. Hey, Jane, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I got two things I wanted to talk about. One is the going back to your original question that you posed about whether the fervent Trump supporters are merely badly misinformed or basically bullies. I would say, obviously, the people like Jim Jordan, the Matt Getzes of the world, or the Kavanaughs, those would be bullies. But I take the example of my Republican, very political stepmother, and the conversations I've had with her are just, I think they're fear-based. I mean, she's been railing against taxation, and yet she was an ESL teacher, teaching, here in California, teaching, Hispanic folks.
English is a second
people.
language. Yeah.
They loved her. She was lovely. But she has this odd notion, and I tried to talk to her about, she's got fantastic retirement benefits, wonderful health care, and I tried to reason with her that you wouldn't have this had you not been a California part of the teachers union, anti-union. So she's been following this for a long time. She follows a guy named Mark Levin who says all Democrats hate America. Yeah. I mean, she's just been brainwashed. I mean, my dad, who was also a Republican, but he was a Harvard guy. I mean, he loved black jazz. He was a good guy. But by the time they start watching Fox together, I mean, they were both, they're basically, you cannot reason with them. I mean, she admires Pence and Ivanka and that sort of thing. So, she's good-hearted, but just badly misinformed. And I think it's fear-based, but, I don't talk to her that much about it because I always seem like I'm hitting a brick wall. So that being said, there are the bullies and then there's the badly misinformed. But I wanted to also go back to an earlier caller who talked about C-SPAN, Washington Journal. And I called Stephanie Miller earlier today because I'm on a crusade Washington Journal is 3 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this morning they had a gentleman from Time Magazine and somebody from the Washington Post, very, very, laying out impeachment. And 70% of the callers that call in are Republicans, independents, or people that say I'm a Democrat, but they say Democrat Party. So that's the giveaway.
Sure.
But this is one of the few spaces in America that we have where we can actually have Republicans and Democrats here, come into the same space together. And I would like to encourage your viewers. We've got to get out there and get the message out. We have so few public spaces where the two come together. And I want to tell them, say, hey, if you call Thom Hartmann, he'll put you to the top of the line, because they obviously love to hear their voice, but they are just, it's so badly misinformed. The arguments out there are just so poor. I mean, you have a lovely older black woman who's, one of the few people, the black ladies touting our side of the story. So that's my mission. I really encourage people to call into Washington Journal and give our side of the story. We're badly misrepresented. And I want to thank you for all you do, Tom. You're
welcome.
Much.
Thank you, Jane, and happy holidays to you and your family. Stephanie in Hopkins Park, Illinois. Hey, Stephanie, what's up?
Well, first I wanted the guy who talked about Blagojevich. He was actually convicted for trying to sell the seat. That other part about him with the Tribune was something they did in the trial to show his character.
Okay.
But he never sold the seat. He was caught trying to sell the seat, which is pretty much in line with what Trump is being impeached for.
You're right.
He never, got them to put out the articles or investigate the Bidens, but it was just, but he got caught trying to. But Gordon's got 14 years, so I don't know why Trump would be any less. But talking to some of my friends and people I know, they say that they follow Trump simply because it's like being in junior high. You have the three tables. You have the nerd table, the regular people table, and then you have the popular kids table. The nerdy table never gets in with any other table, and they feel like Trump is the one from the other tables because they feel like people like Barack Obama was talking big words they couldn't understand and didn't, he went to Yale, so what has he got to Harvard or whatever? What has he got to do with me? But Trump says words like "get him out of here," dump that down, and they understand those words, and they said they feel finally like someone's in office who is at the level of what they call the average American person, and they don't want to let go of that because we've dumbed down our education. Nobody can understand anybody over a third grade reading level, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I think Trump's use of profanity actually increases that sense among those people that he's one of them. He's just an average guy.
Right, and so this is why they say they've got to stick with him, because if they let go of him, they're going to go back to people that don't understand them, that are rich, that go to Harvard.
The so-called elites. And what they don't get is that Trump is actually supported by the elites, by the billionaires, by, Robert Mercer and Shelley Adelson and his entire party and all his efforts supported by Charles Koch. But
they don't know that. They don't know that because he says, I'm a billionaire and I funded it all myself. When you try to tell them, oh, no, he didn't. He said that he didn't have no other funding, and now that's fake news. So once he put the fake news defense out, that's the end. Everything does not agree with him is fake news. So you can show him a picture holding Edelson's hand or going to parties with him, whatever. And that's fake.
Yeah. Well, and Hitler had a word for that. He invented this word, Lügenpresse, the lying press, what we would call fake news. And it was one of his major political things, was attacking the press. So, Steph.
Yeah, that's my point, and I can't get across to him anymore, so I'll leave him alone.
Okay. Stephanie, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you, and happy holidays. It is a remarkable time we live in. In the next hour, I want to get into Trump and debates and humanity and climate talks. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Proof of Conspiracy, How Trump's International Collusion is Threatening American Democracy by Seth Abramson. This is from the introduction. In late 2015, after Donald Trump has formally announced his candidacy for president, a geopolitical conspiracy emerges overseas, whose key participants are the leaders of Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. These 6 men decide that Trump is the antidote to their ills. For Russia, U.S. sanctions. For Israel, the lack of Arab allies. For Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, perceived threats emanating from Iran. The conspirators commit themselves to doing whatever is necessary to ensure that Donald Trump is elected. Trump's presidential campaign is aware of and benefits from this conspiracy both before and after the 2016 election. On March 19, 2018, British journalist David Hurst, the former chief foreign leader writer for The Guardian, publishes the most important report of his career. Hurst, at one time the Moscow bureau chief at The Guardian, is now editor-in-chief of his own publishing venture, a London-based Middle East watchdog called the Middle East Eye. In the spring of 2018, he reports the existence of a years-long, continent-spanning conspiracy that will eventually envelop the President of the United States. The Red Sea Conspiracy. This book denominates the conspiracy Hurst uncovers as the Red Sea Conspiracy for the simple reason that it is hatched on a yacht in the middle of the Red Sea, a seawater inlet of the Indian Ocean bordered by, among other countries, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. One imagines that in his many years as a correspondent and commentator for The Scotsman, The Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, El Arabi, Al Jaid, TRT World, which is Turkish, Masr al-Aghan, Egypt, and The Guardian, Hurst never thought he'd stumble on a story as far-reaching in its implications as the Red Sea Conspiracy. But he did, and what he found could change the course of history. This book chronicles the events around the globe that preceded and followed the fall 2015 origin of the conspiracy, with a special focus on how the conspiracy prompted Donald Trump and his aides, allies, and associates to covertly collude with 6 countries, both before and after the 2016 presidential election: Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Bahrain, and Egypt. Events that began on the Red Sea in 2015 now influence President Trump's foreign policy toward all of these countries, toward other countries not involved in the conspiracy, such as Qatar and Iran, and more broadly toward Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The story of the Red Sea Conspiracy begins with a man named George Nader. As reported by Hurst in the Middle East Eye, toward the end of 2015, Nader, then an advisor to the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, known as MBZ, convened, with his patron's permission, a summit of some of the Middle East's most powerful leaders. Gathered on a boat in the Red Sea in the fall of 2015 were Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who would shortly become the heir apparent to the throne of the Saudi kingdom. MZB himself, by 2015 the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the president of Egypt. Prince Salman bin Hamad, the Crown Prince of Bahrain, and King Abdullah II of Jordan. Nader, the improbable maestro of these rulers' clandestine get-together, intended the plan he posed to the men to include the nation of Libya, but no representative from that nation attended the gathering. Of the leaders aboard the yacht, two, MBS and MBZ, are already close. According to a New Yorker interview with Richard A. Clarke, a counterterrorism advisor to Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, MBS and MBZ, quote, talk on the phone all day to each other, end quote. The Red Sea meeting, although technically convened by Nader, is a means for MBZ to advance ambitions that he and MBS have designed together. The two Sunni Arab leaders' intention, Hearst records, is to remake the Middle East with the covert assistance of a highly placed American politician. They intend to do this by first renaming and reconstituting the membership of the six-member Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, which in 2015 comprises Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar, while reorienting to its regional ambitions and global alliances. The proposed GCC realignment would evict Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar from the Council and replace these three countries with Egypt, Jordan, and Libya, thereby eliminating the entity's historical association with the Persian Gulf and remaking it as, instead, an alliance constituting, quote, an elite regional group of 6 countries which would supplant the GCC and form the nucleus of a coalition of pro-U.S. and pro-Israeli states in the Middle East, end quote. According to two sources briefed on the 2015 Red Sea Summit, quote, Nader said this group of states could become a force in the region that the United States government could depend on to counter the influence of Turkey and Iran, end quote. Prior to 2015, Turkey and Saudi Arabia had intermittently enjoyed strong diplomatic ties. The book Proof of Conspiracy by Seth Abramson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. This hour of the program is brought to you in part by xchairtom.com, xchairtom.com. And we've been talking about the nature of Trump supporters. I think it's in some ways a reflection of the nature of Trump. I'm also asking the question, if Trump doesn't participate in the debates, I had asked the question last hour, if Trump doesn't participate in the debates, does that help him or hurt him? I think maybe a larger question is, does that help or hurt the democratic process? I mean, debating has been, it hasn't been a feature of every presidential election. In fact, it probably hasn't been a feature of the majority of presidential elections. But, you know, starting certainly with the Lincoln-Douglas debates, there has been, which weren't for president, by the way, I believe that was for the Senate. But the idea of presidential candidates debating each other is something that really came into full flower with the election of 1960. In fact, I think that might have been the first major debate of the last century. And, you know, pretty much continued. And Trump might be on the verge of killing that tradition. So the question, I suppose, is what does that portend for, you know, the future of our political system? So anyhow, it's an awful lot of stuff here. Let's pick up some of your phone calls and get on with it. Sarah in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Sarah, what's on your mind?
Yeah. Let me take you off speakerphone real quick. Hang on. There we go. I'm living with a whole family of Trump supporters.
Oh my!
And so I know. The holidays are unique. But the other thing is, they're not bad people.
Sure.
But I will say that, I know this is horrible. The one base thing that I can put together is that there is some racism there.
Yeah. That's a huge part of Trump's pitch. I mean, that's where he started, was with the wall, which was dog whistle racism. And, you know, it's also where Viktor Orban started. You know, that's unfortunate. And the thing that really sticks with me from watching Jen Seiko's movie, The Brainwashing of My Dad, which I think is over on Netflix now, wherever it is, Netflix or Prime, it's easy to find, was that her father was this kind, loving guy, and he started watching Fox News, and he turned into an angry, paranoid curmudgeon. And then when they finally basically took away Fox News from him, and I don't recall at the end of the movie how they did that. I think they might have said that the cable company had dropped it or something. But he had basically a diet or a fast. He was not able to watch Fox News for a few weeks, and he woke up from his trance and became a decent person again, which was just breathtaking. At the end of the movie, he's hugging her and he's politically rational.
And I will also say, yes, Fox News. There were times I've called. Obviously, I'm in my 50s. My parents are older, and they're like, "Oh, I can't talk to you because Fox News is coming on." And and I hate to give them any kind of airplay, but I think it's been a big problem with building Trump's support. And now that they're actually trying to, in my opinion, I think they're trying to do real reporting. And Trump's going, "Oh, you can't trust Fox News anymore."
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's, he's got a burr under his saddle about Chris Wallace now. And before it was Shep Smith. And Shep Smith finally resigned, and now it's Chris Wallace. And he's going to try and beat up Chris Wallace. And it's going to be interesting to see which way, the Murdoch family takes this thing. Because, Fox News is either going to end up, I think it's going to either end up being a pure propaganda organ, or they're going to start dialing back their propaganda. But we'll see. Sarah, thank you for the call.
The other thing that I would like to say before I get off is that I'm in my 50s, and the way the states are going with the women's abortion and stuff, we all had to stand up because it's not right.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you, Sarah, for the call. Richard in Sanford, Colorado. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Well, quite a few things, but I first of all want to say thank you so much for the work that you do on behalf of the Fourth Estate. The media is the only business that's mentioned in the Constitution, and what you're doing is crucial.
Thank you.
It's very important, and I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Secondly, I wanted to say that Trump supporters are more like Insane Clown Posse fans than Grateful Dead fans.
I don't know what the Insane Clown Posse is. That a thing, or is that just a phrase?
That's actually a Detroit, Michigan-based band and cultural phenomenon. They're often called deplorable. They relish that designation, and so the Trump supporters fit in the.
What is it, like right-wing heavy metal?
Fans. Pardon me?
Is it like right-wing heavy metal?
No, it's gutter punk absurdity almost. Like
amazing.
Just like slash all the.
No, I get it, Richard. Move back to your point. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the Grateful Dead fans. You say what you will about them, but they weren't deplorable by any means.
Yeah,
they were some wonderful people.
You're right, and it wasn't even a cult. It was more like enjoyment. People were not going to get angry. They were not going to change the world. They were going to basically get high and listen to some good music.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So today you brought up some really important things using your power of the media. Voting rights, I think, are crucial. We need to get paper ballots as a national protection for our vote, and we need to
enshrine a right to vote in the Constitution, or at least in law. The 1993 Motor Voter Act starts out by saying it is the right of every American to vote, but that has never gone through through the Supreme Court essentially. And in fact, the Supreme Court has fought voting rights. I mean, they gutted the Voting Rights Act.
on a deeper level than I do, but I just recognize that we need to protect our vote. We need to make sure that there's a paper ballot, so we can't be subjected to hacking of the and which brings me to, I mean, earlier you had a caller that talked about his Cuban grandfather or his Cuban father, and he mentioned the progressive grandchildren of that Don Francisco that came from Cuba after the revolution, and how the Don had become very Republican and supported Trump, but those grandchildren, they're progressive. He mentioned that, and I called really today to point out that we need to register the youth for the revolution in the voting booth.
There you go.
We need to get young people out and not try and convince Trump supporters or you know.
I think we can do both. Come on, Richard. We can walk and chew gum. Anyhow, Richard, I got to run. Thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I want to talk a little bit about science when we come back from the other side of this break, too. Stick around. And welcome back. Let's see here. Jim in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom.
Hi, Jim.
First-time caller.
Thank you.
And really appreciate what you do here. I was calling because I think you know, there's a misunderstanding of some of the Trump supporters. I'm thinking of some nearby neighbors that were Obama supporters and then have turned towards Trump. And mainly there's a couple of arguments that the left uses that ring hollow with them, you know, and one is that women only make 75% or something of what a man makes, and yet their wives are making more than they are now. And so on the lower income scale, I think parity's been reached. And that's not being, you know, and that's a win, but it's not being portrayed accurately. And so when you say, oh, privileged white males get more money, it's not ringing to them, it sounds like.
Yeah, but that's not a big enough, you know, the fact that a government policy may try to reduce discrimination against women in the workplace is not the kind of thing that turns an election, Jim.
Well, I'm only talking about like the things that you say on your program, you know, women only make 78% of the money, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And they listen to your program and then that makes...
Well, they may not believe that one talking point. I mean, you know, I've had a lot of conservatives say, well, that's because women have babies and they're in and out of the workforce and blah, 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 blah. And there's actually some truth to that, but you know, the simple reality is that broadly speaking, in industry after industry, women not only make less than men, but women are less likely to end up in senior management.
Well, there's more women graduating from college now than men.
Yes, and that's been the case for almost a decade.
That's a win. Should highlight that as well. Yeah. But I mean, so that's one talking point. But I mean, the other one I think you brought up on your show earlier, which is never mentioned, is the U.S. life expectancy has gone down, and there's one demographic that accounts for that entire drop. Otherwise, the other ones are going up.
Right, it's white men.
Turns out to be European American men.
Yeah. Yeah, so, in particular, white men in red states. I mean, there's four states that account for almost 90% of the drop in mortality in the United States. And they're all four of them are Republican states where they have not expanded Medicaid.
Well, so I mean, I guess there's a point, but they know that, and it's not being addressed. So, yeah. I mean, by the Democratic Party, so they don't feel included. like the Democratic Party.
Well, their life expectancy is going down because 40 years of neoliberal policy have shifted the social safety net away from them, have shifted the jobs overseas, and they're left with basically nothing. And Republicans come along and say it's Democrats who did this to you, when in fact it's Reaganism. This is just pure Reaganism that has produced this. Reagan, did the first NAFTA. It was ultimately George Herbert Walker Bush who negotiated it and finalized the whole treaty deal. But this is Republican policy. Jim, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Listener-supported videos. Check it out. Tag you're in. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And for our science note here, I wanted to get into this. Some just remarkable stuff coming out of the EU. This and the climate talks. First of all, the climate talks just in Madrid essentially fell apart. And they fell apart in large part because the United States, Australia, and Saudi Arabia said, we're not going to play. Saudi Arabia, of course, produces massive amounts of oil. It's the basis of their entire economy. The political system of Australia, since Rupert Murdoch bought more than half of all the media, all the newspapers in the country, and has been heavily influenced by a woman who is the richest person in Saudi Arabia and a coal baron. Saudi Arabia's politics have flipped. And also Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, who is burning down the Amazon, said no. And these countries, Brazil, Australia, Saudi Arabia, and then the U.S. just saying, we're not even going to talk to y'all. But the other three countries defending loopholes and opposing commitments to climate action, a true disaster. Meanwhile, over at the European Union, they have rolled out their version of a Green New Deal. And this is a really big deal, the EU's Green New Deal. It just came out. This is from the European Commission. The President Ursula von der Leyen outlined this on Wednesday of this week. Number one, it calls for Europe to be climate neutral by 2050, which ain't that far down the road. To get there, they're saying that by 2030, there will be a 50% cut in greenhouse gas emissions, maybe as much as 55%, to replace the current objective for 2030, which is a 40% cut. They raised that to 55%. Secondly, they're calling for smart sector integration, bringing together electricity, gas, and heating sectors all into one system. And they want to feed a lot of it with offshore wind, which is very, very powerful. So that's number one. Number two, what they call a circular economy. For example, making steel is something that traditionally uses enormous amounts of coal. They're proposing replacing that coal with hydrogen. Where do you get the hydrogen? You get it from offshore wind farms that generate electricity from the wind and then use that to split water into hydrogen and oxygen atoms. Number three, building renovation. They want to triple the renovation rate for buildings all across Europe. Number 4, zero pollution by 2050. In the air, in the soil, and in the water, a toxic-free environment by 2050. Number 5, ecosystems and biodiversity. This is to tackle water and soil pollution, as well as a new forest strategy to bring back life in Europe. Number 6, the farm to fork strategy. They want green and healthier agriculture. They want to, in particular, reduce the use of chemical pesticides, fertilizers, and antibiotics in animal agriculture. They've largely done that. Denmark, for example, now they grow hogs with absolutely no antibiotics, and and they're doing just fine. If they can do it, anybody can do it. With regard to transportation, they want to deploy 1 million public charging points across Europe by the year 2025. With regard to money, they've got this leave no one behind proposal for a transition mechanism to fossil fuels. Many of the savings that they will see, they are going to give back to people as cash. With regard to R&D and innovation, they want 35% of the European Union's research funding now to be set aside for climate-friendly technologies. And then number 10, external relations. They want to reach out to countries all around the world and have them participate. Now, this is not a political party proposing this, like here in the United States where the Democrats are talking. In fact, a fragment of a political party, the Progressive Democrats, are talking about a Green New Deal, led by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. This is the European Union itself. This is the European Commission, and it was presented by the president, Ursula von der Leyen. So there it is. Amazing stuff. Back to your calls. Ivan, you had some thoughts about Trump and debating. I've been really scratching my head on this one. My personal opinion is if he doesn't participate in the debates, that'll probably work to his benefit, but I could be completely wrong. What do you think, Ivan?
Hey, Tom. A couple of weeks ago, Bernie sat down with the editors and reporters at the Des Moines Register newspaper for an interview, answered all their questions beautifully and succinctly.
Yep.
I hope all your listeners, Tom, will go to YouTube and pull up that interview where they will see that Bernie would crush Trump in a debate. In my opinion, there is no way Trump will ever have the guts to debate Bernie if he is the nominee.
Yeah. I think you're right. What if Joe Biden is the nominee? Do you think Trump would debate him?
He might not, because I think Biden is Trump-esque in his debating style. So, other than Biden, I don't think anyone else would be able to hold their own against Trump.
Oh, I think Elizabeth Warren could easily hold her own against Trump. My guess is that Pete Buttigieg could also. I'm not so sure about. Well, I'm not going to put anybody down.
I'm just giving you my opinion, Tom.
Yeah.
Well, I know one thing: Bernie would crush him.
Oh yeah. I mean, Bernie is sharp. He knows his points. I mean, he's been living them for 50, 60 years. Ever since he was a teenager, Bernie has been grounded in these issues.
Exactly.
So.
And that's why I hope and pray. Again, I ask all your listeners, go to YouTube and search the Des Moines Register interview with Bernie Sanders. It's about an hour-long interview.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful.
Okay. Thank you, Ivan. I'll check that out. I appreciate the call and the recommendation. And interesting thoughts on the debate. Yeah, I think Bernie would wipe the floor with Donald Trump. I think Elizabeth Warren would too. The other, we'll see the others. Anyhow, we'll be right back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program. Viagra for your brain.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Helping you win the water cooler wars. We'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. "He does not want this cash," the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Coke's products without ever seeing Coke's name attached. Coke refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Coke is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Coke makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Cokeland, by Christopher Leonard. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
I think it's a very forward process. It's not rocket science, so you can check it out at thomhartmann.com. Thank you. And welcome back. Just quick update on a few other things going on in the world today. More than 500 rallies are planned for tomorrow night across the country. This is assuming that the House is going to vote on impeachment on Wednesday, and I think that's probably, at this point, a fairly safe assumption. Credo Action, Indivisible, Public Citizen, MoveOn.org, a bunch of organizations are promoting this. Hundreds of thousands of people have signed up. Odds are that wherever you live, given that there's 500 rallies, wherever you live, there's going to be one near you. So you just, check it out. It's all over the internet. The Democrats in the House of Representatives this week passed a bill requiring Medicare to negotiate drug prices. This is a huge, big deal. You will recall that Donald Trump campaigned on allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. He said it'll save hundreds of billions of dollars, which is true. It would save about $600 billion a decade. That's how much extra profits the drug companies are extracting from Medicare. And the Democrats passed a law in the House of Representatives saying that, sure enough, the Medicare should be able to negotiate and must negotiate, in fact. This will save, what did I say, $600 billion before? I was wrong. It'll save $456 billion over the next decade. $358 billion of that will be direct savings to the federal government itself, because in our Medicare, the federal government pays for most of the drugs, and they're going to use the money according to and this is built into this legislation. They're going to use that $350 roughly billion in savings over the next decade to expand Medicare to cover dental, vision, hearing, and additional funding for the National Institutes of Health to develop new drugs. That's amazing. And then secondly, there was a study done on this is the Washington Post reported on this, on what Americans voters really want. These are points that 70% or greater of Americans agree with. Number one, getting a college education is too costly and states should work to make college more affordable. Now, this is from the Washington Post. Number two, wealthy families and corporations should be paying a lot more in taxes. Number three, people without employer-based health care should have the option of buying into a public plan. 70% support. Number four, we should spur job creation through a $1 trillion infrastructure plan that includes the expansion of green energy production. Number 5, we should reduce poverty by ensuring that all families have access to basic needs such as health care, food, and housing if their wages are so low they can't make ends meet. And finally, we should curb income inequality with a 2% wealth tax on net worth exceeding $50 million. That's Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax. 70% of support. And by the way, 2/3 of voters polled said their personal economic outcome or outlook, 2/3 had either gotten worse, that was 24% of people who were polled, or stayed the same, 40%. So 2/3 of Americans are not feeling any good stuff out of this economy. Only 34% said their outlook had improved. That would be the minority, I'm guessing, who owns stocks. So there you go. Ken in Elkton, Maryland. Hey, Ken, what's on your mind today?
Hey, man, you've talked about so many things since I've been here on hold. But thank you for waiting. Thing you were just, yeah. I got a friend across the street, and like you're saying, so many of these Trump people, they get brainwashed or whatever. He's a nice guy, but he's talking now. He'll be happy when the Civil War starts.
Oh my God!
And crazy thing. And I said to him, "So what? You would shoot me?" And then he just didn't say anything. And whenever you talk to him to try and bring up facts or anything, they always, I don't want to talk politics. And that's generally how I was raised. Don't talk politics,
right.
But then you've talked so much about the science and everything like this, and he's a hunter. And so you talk about the global warming and everything. And even that, you try and talk that to them about, it's all baloney. It's all baloney. They fall for all this stuff that, like you were talking about, Fox News or whatever, wherever they're getting information. He's a Fox News guy, and his mom and all them. But it's just, people don't get it. You can show right in their face the truth, whether it's about the environment or whatever.
Yeah. And well, that's because they live in a world that is constantly reinforcing these falsehoods, these lies that they're believing.
Exactly.
The climate change is just a hoax, and that the air and water are cleaner than they've ever been, and that we don't need the EPA anymore, and that the pork industry will self-regulate. They don't need any. We don't need no stinking inspectors and all this other stuff.
And it's all. And Donald Trump came right out and told them, and I bring that up to some of these guys too. When he first started with Andrea Mitchell, that I guess that was how he told her straight up, if you keep saying a lie long enough, people will believe the lie. Isn't that basically what he said?
Well, I don't recall Trump saying that, but certainly that's what Adolf Hitler said. I mean, he wrote that in Mein Kampf.
No, he was talking to Andrea Mitchell. I believe that was her, and that's exactly what he said to her. And I don't know if you can go back and check it out or anything, but that's exactly what he told her.
Huh.
And that's what they all do, or the people, Fox News, Hannity, or whatever. They keep telling the same baloney, and they know it's baloney, and they keep on, and people get brainwashed.
Yeah, it's a real tragedy. It really is.
And then the environment. That little girl comes out and speaks, and this guy comes out and belittles the little girl. And I have grandkids and so forth. You talk about working class people. I've been busting my butt forever. I'm 48 years old. I remember my father. He worked, and on Saturdays you work to make extra money to go camp, take us camping, and so forth. So now, if you ain't making $1,000 a week, you ain't making it.
Yeah.
So as far as the Civil War crap goes, when people can't buy shoes for their kids and put food in their mouth, that's when people maybe see the light of how they've been misled.
Well, and that's the thing. The great crash of the 1930s,
it brings people together.
Well, in a way, yeah. I mean, it brought people together around FDR, but it also brought people together around Hitler, and so leadership really matters, and that's why I think this election is so important, because we're on the edge, I think, of the next great crash. Ken, thank you for the call. Well said. Jay in Scottsville, Virginia. Hey, Jay, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, hi. I wonder how many people, when they take an oath to the Constitution, recognize that they're taking an oath to the intention of the Constitution, the maintenance of domestic tranquility, because our Constitution is an anthropological document, and maintenance of domestic tranquility is the environment in which we advance into the infinite capacity of natural science knowledge. we now have been supplied with a chaos monster that provides the perfect capacity of confirming bias towards what allows us to self-destruct that we've been doing.
So Jay, you're arguing that Republicans have betrayed the principles of the preamble of the Constitution? Is that what you're saying?
The preamble has been avoided assiduously by lawyers who attempt to call it something beside the law and order condition of the Constitution.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Jay, well said. Thank you very much. James in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Hey, James, what's up?
How you doing, Tom?
Good.
First off, I'd like to thank you for given a platform for liberal Democrats like me to be able to voice my opinion.
Okay.
The reason I called, and by the way, Elizabeth Warren would make Trump look like an idiot.
Yeah.
I really believe that.
I agree.
But the reason I called today, I ran in. I'm a steel worker from Western Pennsylvania, and our mills have been shut down for years now.
Mm-hmm.
And I ran into my local president today and another friend of mine that worked with me for years. Now, these guys are about 6 years older than me, and when I started out in the mill, I kind of looked up to them because of the strong union words that they talked. And in fact, the one guy a long time ago told me about how conservatives turns into a little bit of a fascism. The further they go to the right, the worse they get.
Mm-hmm.
So I basically said to them, I says, what do you think of Trump? And they says, oh, he's the greatest president this country's ever had. And I says, I was in shock. I'm talking to an ex-president of my local. And I said, are you serious? And he goes, yeah. And the president said that this man is great. He goes, he's a smart businessman. He's a genius. I says, I thought at first they may be joking with me, but they weren't joking.
Yeah.
They are all in on Trump. And it's kind of shocking. But around this area in Western Pennsylvania, I get into conversations. I go to Hawaii all the time, and I get in conversations, and it's strong for Trump.
Yeah.
And and this used to be a strong Democratic Union area of where I live, and it's totally turned.
Well, this is Fox
county
News. You know, Fox News is free on basic cable. They're basically in every household in America, and it's a little bit of poison that some people touch.
But you would think that I would be able to reason and say you got to look at what he's doing. And he goes, well, everything. And the ex-president said, well, everything he's doing is great. Look at the economy; it's booming. Look at and you can't argue with them. That's the thing.
Well, it's like the Roaring '20s, but the economy, like in the Roaring '20s, is only booming for the top 10%. The bottom 90% are screwed. But James, I get it, and I'm sorry to hear your situation, and I hope someday these guys can be awakened. But
I don't think so.
Yeah, as long as they keep watching Fox News, they probably won't. James, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. I appreciate it, and thanks for watching us on your Roku box. In fact, we'll be right back. Continue our conversations here today. Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 46 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Tim in Aloha, Oregon. Hey, Tim, you wanted to go back to something I brought up, I think, at the first hour, the evangelicals.
Yeah, I've been on hold for a while, but, basically, if there was ever a time in our society, what we need is a separation of church and state. It's a critical aspect of what we have now.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I mean, it's absolutely amazing what's happening in terms of the religious nonsense in this country. And then you see the effects of climate change killing people in these massive storms. You see all these poor people being killed by all this gun violence and stuff. And what's the first and last phrase that comes out of everybody's mouth after they're on TV? Are thoughts and prayers. That's sure doing a lot of good, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that phrase has been kind of, they had to abandon it after the Newtown massacre. Those kids just would not tolerate it anymore, and I think that was a turning point. Yeah, but it's
what we need, what we simply need, and this follows some of the stuff you were talking about while I was on hold, was we need a pragmatic, scientific, agnostic approach to the world's problems, and not just the U.S.
Yeah.
That's what we need, because otherwise, if we don't approach it in a logical, ethical manner, what we're doing is putting Band-Aids on everything.
Yeah, you're talking about the ideals of the Enlightenment. I mean, these were the ideals that were developed in the 1600s that created the United States in the 1700s, that ultimately were fought over during the Civil War in the 1800s, that led to the enfranchisement of women in the 1900s and the Civil Rights Act, and now in the 2000s are being largely forgotten or ignored. When Reagan, Bill Bennett took the requirement for civics education out of our public schools in the 1980s.
Yeah. Then we're condemned to repeat it. You see what I mean? That's what we're in, yeah. A prime example, and we've talked about this before, if you look at the turn of the century, McKinley, who was a financial conservative, he was in the back pockets of the Mellons and the Rockefellers.
Yep.
The best thing that ever happened, unfortunately, is that he was assassinated in September of 2001, but Roosevelt got in there. Look at the first 20 years of the 20th century. Women's right to vote, income tax, state and federal parks. You could go on and on and on, It built...
Inheritance tax.
It helped build a middle class that was reinstituted after the Marshall Plan.
Yep.
You see what I mean?
Yep. And the Tillman Act, which banned donations in federal elections. Yeah, all of it. Right. All of it. Thanks a lot, Tim. Good to hear from you. Rob in Mesa, Arizona. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hey, not much. One first thing I want to get out is anytime they bring up Hunter Biden, people have to bring up Trump Jr. because he was never questioned in front of the grand jury for Mueller over that whole Trump Tower thing. And why is that?
Yep.
The other thing I'd like to bring up is this administration is bringing the impeachment to a new level, because what we're fighting now is a Republican crime party. Mm-hmm. So you have a Senate who thinks the president's above the law. You have an attorney general that thinks the president's above the law. How do you combat that? We almost need to expand out the impeachment to include some of these senators and the attorney general after this.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. I mean, that'll be just viewed as naked politics. But I do think, Adam Schiff has made it very clear. He's going to, and so is Jerry Nadler. They're going to continue their investigations. They're going to keep going on this thing. And so, I think this trial in the Senate is going to cast Trump in a very bad light. I was very encouraged to hear Alan Grayson point out that after Andrew Johnson survived the impeachment, he tried to stand for re-election for his own party, and he got 1/7 of the support he had before because the impeachment had so tarnished his reputation. And, let's hope the same thing happens with Trump. Rob, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Mike in, is it Quilcene, Washington? Am I saying that right, Mike?
You are.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, not much. I was listening to your show. I love it.
Thank you.
I like what you do there.
But what I watched all the investigations and all that, and I saw two complete, and you pointed this out too, two complete narratives. We have like the Democrats following our Department of Justice, FBI, CIA, all their reports. And then we have the Republicans following this Russian agenda. And why in all that did not anybody ask the Republicans specifically, why are you not believing our intelligence agency?
Yeah. It would have been it could have been a real moment if, and it may still happen. I mean, keep in mind, all the back and forth and all the fighting and all the, squirrely stuff that we saw in the various committees, in the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee on TV. I think at least some of that anyway is going to be repeated tomorrow, or day after tomorrow rather, when the entire House votes on the articles of impeachment. There's going to be, or at least in miniature, right? There's going to be one person, and maybe more, who stands up and says, this is why we're indicting the president, which is what an impeachment is. And then there's going to be somebody from the Republican Party who's going to stand up and say, and this is why we say that indictment is meaningless or shouldn't be voted for. And
right, but they don't provide any proof, like you're saying. That one indictment would be, yes, this is the issue here, but we're following the directives or the information from our intelligence agencies, not
right.
And they're following a completely separate narrative, but they say the narrative. We heard it over and over, all the way back to crowd. Anyway, all that stuff.
Yeah,
and it's a complete false narrative, and they just do it, but nobody says, why are you doing it? That's what I haven't heard. Why are you?
I'm guessing they're doing it because there's A, political power involved, and B, big bucks involved, and that's a whole second level. I mean, Lev Parnas has been passing out Ukrainian and Russian oligarch money apparently to Republicans for years, and it's not even being investigated yet.
No.
But there's some serious stuff here, I think. Mike, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Diana in Bloomfield, Indiana. Hey, Diana, what's up?
Hi. I just don't understand why the Republicans are just so lemming-like in supporting Trump. If they give their power away now and he does get reelected, if he can do whatever he wants, he's not going to need them anymore.
You're right. And that's my concern. My concern is that if Trump is reelected, Viktor Orban stood for election in 2010. Hungary was a fully developed, functioning democracy and a member of the European Union and NATO at the time. And in 9 years now, Viktor Orban has completely flipped Hungary. It's now an autocratic, basically a single-party state. And the way that he got there was he was reelected twice, and in 2015 and 2017. And the EU tried to basically impeach him, and it didn't work, and he came back. He has his cronies, his buddies, his oligarch buddies, his billionaire buddies have bought all the media in Hungary. He has stacked the courts. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and that's what I think is going to happen here if Trump gets reelected. Diana, I'm very concerned.
And I'm terrified.
Yeah, well,
I don't understand how people do not see this.
Yeah, we can't get terrified.
I've been watching survivor stories about the Holocaust.
Yeah, we've got to... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And this is exactly what they talked about. Everybody thought everything was fine, and the next thing you know, the Nazis were marching in.
Yeah.
But it wasn't fine, and how did they not see that coming? When we can see it coming, I am terrified.
Yeah, maybe it's time, once again to read from Milton Mayer's book, They Thought They Were Free, because the Germans, I mean, they thought that Hitler was the guy that was saving their country, and in some ways early on he did.
That had democracies like Poland and Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, I'm with you. Diana, thank you for the call, and appreciate it. And thank you for being with us today. All 3 hours, or as much of these 3 hours as you have been. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, for more. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy doesn't just happen. You got to spread the word, you got to wake people up, and you have to make sure that they're registered to vote. So get out there, get active, tag You're It. And by the way, share with your friends how to find progressive media. There's a lot of great places where you can find progressive media, from this program to a whole lot of other really great shows out there. Please tell your friends. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann, For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.